additional 12 operating principles. One of the overarching principles that we discussed early on in the year is the transformative engagement principle. Engage and evaluate consistent with the magnitude, direction, and scope of transformations needed and envisioned. And what that sets up for part 3 of the book are 3 principles directly aimed at transformation. The transformation fidelity principle, ensure that what is called transformation constitutes transformation, and its corollary, evaluate whether and how what is called transformational engagement constitutes a trajectory toward transformation. The transformation alignment principle is to transform evaluation to evaluate transformation. And the final principle is evaluation as intervention principle. Integrated network evaluations to inform and energize transformation. That's partly connecting our various evaluation networks, but also connecting our networks to other networks working towards what we would consider positive transformation. So I'm going to begin with a few of the overarching transformation themes, and then with what time we have left, talk some about the article that's just come out in the American Journal of Evaluation on criteria for transformation as an alternative to the dominant DAC criteria. So let's just settle into thinking about transformation here for a bit. There are various images of transformation. There's actually a symbol for transformation down here in the bottom left. This is individual transformation, identity transformation. Science Magazine has had a number of articles, including technologies transforming biology and other fields. The disaster resiliency challenge is about transforming theory to action under conditions of humanitarian disaster. A great deal of what is dealt with in transformation in the corporate world is about digital transformation. I'm on a transformation Google alert, and 95% of what I get is about digital transformation, or more mundanely, people transforming their kitchens or their wardrobe. But dealing with digital transformation has become a major challenge of the modern chief financial officer, chief executive officer, and a number of Fortune 500 companies now have chief transformation officers or senior transformation committees. Again, most of which is dealing with digital transformation, but some of which we'll see is dealing with the triple bottom line of addressing issues of diversity and sustainability as well as profit. My favorite image of transformation is the monarch butterfly, wintering now in Mexico. I'm coming to you from my small cabin farmstead in northern Minnesota, where we've converted it to prairie restoration and help raise monarchs. This is my granddaughter, Kala, as we're releasing monarchs last summer. So the question becomes, is transformation difficult to measure? And some of you have heard me say before that I actually think that measuring transformation is the easiest assignment evaluators have been given. Transformation, if you have to do a statistical significance test to find out if it has happened, hasn't. It's large scale. It has what is called interocular significance. It hits you between the eye. You know that the caterpillar has changed into a butterfly. You know when things are fundamentally different. It's a sensitizing concept in that regard. It tells us to look for major significant change in the way that things are. And that if you can't see it and recognize it, if it's not palatable, it probably hasn't happened. So we're talking about major kind of things, like the end of slavery, end of apartheid, end of colonialism, collapse of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall, passage of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, pushing back the AIDS epidemic, social media, ending smoking. None of these transformations have ended. We're still dealing with the aftermath of all of them. That's the nature of them. But they each reached a tipping point, a critical mass, where the before and after was palpably different. And we could say that something had transformed. And then there's the consolidation of transformation that can go on for a long time as we continue to deal with the aftermath and new forms of slavery or apartheid, the remnants of colonialism, the reemergence of Russia and China in our global politics, trying to realize the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so transformation is both a trajectory, which is harder to measure, and it's a consolidation period afterwards. The term itself is values neutral. When we use it, we're often thinking to ourselves that we're talking about a positive, desired transformation, but the Great Barrier Reef is being transformed. It's dying. The oceans are being transformed. And so our climate is being transformed. Climate warming is a form of transformation that's having widespread effects. And so we have to, as always, in evaluation, add value premises into our interpretation of the meaning and impact of transformation. We're, from a Blue Marble evaluation perspective, looking at transformation in a global context. There are a series of transformation conferences that are going on around the world. I've had the opportunity to attend a couple of those. This year's was virtual, but the first one I went to at the University of Dundee in Scotland in 2017 was keynoted by Terry Ahern, CEO of the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, who in his keynote emphasized the way in which we are using resources on the earth as if we have more than one earth, but there is, as we all know, no planet B. And so one of the directions of transformation is living within the resources of one planet. And there are a number of initiatives that take that perspective, trying to understand and calculate planetary boundaries for sustaining humanity on Earth. Ian Fozzi, who is director of the Center for Environmental Change and Human Resilience at the University of Dundee, in his keynote said climate change really does change everything. If we're going to meet global targets or stabilize global temperatures, then we're going to have significant change, whether we like it or not. Suzanne Moser from the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment focused on the connection between individual and global change, transformations in our personal lives, if it is life we want for a future of humanity on Earth. Kumi Naidu is the launch executive director of the African Civil Society Initiative, gave a stirring keynote in which he said the most important challenge for leadership of our time, whether the leaders are from the private sector, from government, or from civil society, is how we can tell it like it is, speak truth to power, and say that we are 5 minutes till midnight on climate change. That was 3 years ago. We're now 1 minute till midnight as the indicators continue to get worse. Millian Belay, coordinator of the African Alliance for Food Sovereignty, wrote a blog about that conference in which he said, I globetrot from one meeting to another. Some of us are caught up in this cycle and there seems to be no way out of it. Anyway, this year, in 2017, I participated in 9 international meetings. I was active in all of them, either as part of the organizing group or as a presenter. There's one thread connecting them all, transformation. We could go on and on. The Australian Evaluation Society made their conference theme transformation a couple of years ago. Just a month ago, Eval Youth had their 5th anniversary of their global network with a virtual conference. The theme was Evaluation for Transformation on Social Change. The International Development Evaluation Association in Prague a year ago, in October, had transformation, evaluating transformation as that theme. So transformation is very much a present concern for us. And the premise of the Blue Marble evaluation book is that requires us to transform evaluation to evaluate transformation. And I'm going to discuss how I approach that in the book. and invite your questions and comments. It has to do with this notion that we've moved into a new geologic era, the Anthropocene, where human beings are having more impact on the Earth's environment than natural resources can sustain. The SDG agenda is called a transformative agenda. There's an SDG Transformations Forum. The dimensions of transformational change that the Climate Investment Fund has identified include the relevance of the initiative moving towards a low carbon, climate resilient targets, that the catalytic processes that significantly expand and diffuse the development and deployment of low carbon and climate resilient technologies, that there's major systemic change, deep fundamental shifts in patterns of individual, institution, community, and private sector decision-making, and sustainability, transformation changes that are designed to be financially, economically, environmentally, sociopolitically, or physically robust and resilient. These changes are durable and lasting in ways that lessen the likelihood of reverting back to past practices and persist over time. So the challenge for evaluation is to develop approaches that are consistent with these calls for transformation and transformation initiatives. One of the things that I've developed in the book is the notion that a theory of transformation is different from a theory of change. And Carol Weiss, in her important article on theory of change, Nothing as Practical as a Good Theory, that she wrote in 1995, really put the notion of theory of change on the landscape for foundations, government, nonprofits, and certainly for evaluation. And Carol was talking about using social science theory where people are doing community change. At that Aspen conference, she was aghast that people were making up theories of change with no knowledge of the social science about community change. Foundation staff were just sitting around making up projects and strategies without a foundation of knowledge. And that's what led her to write that article. But theories of change from the beginning have been about projects and programs. They're discrete, they have logic models that with causal mechanisms identified, aimed at specific outcomes, often SMART goals. Transformation of systems is a different and bigger picture. And so in purposeful program theory, again, which targets primarily project and program kind of theory, systems transformation is a different animal. And I'm arguing that the techniques of project level theory of change can't simply be transferred into a theory of transformation. Donna Merton's important work on transformative research and evaluation is primarily about having the voices of traditionally underprivileged, unheard people, the disadvantaged people brought into evaluation as one form of transformation. But we're talking about a larger, more enduring form of systems transformation that involves quilting or layering or integrating multiple theories of change. And basically what the theory of transformation argues is that it's going to involve integrating multiple different kinds of theories of change in a way that they, in combination, create synergies, tipping points, and critical mass that can transform systems. But that no single theory of change in the traditional program and project sense would be sufficient to transform systems. And so one example of this is with transformation theory in the middle, is to look at different ways and different kinds of theories that would contribute to a transformation theory. For example, triangulated social change theory, I'm referring to different social change theories about how individual and institutional change occurs. educational theories, in incentives economically theories, regulatory theories. So when we look at things like working on smoking cessation, no single theory of change was sufficient by itself. There were regulatory initiatives, there were educational initiatives, insurance companies created incentives, companies began creating health incentives, stigma in social norms became part of the change. And so there were multidimensional theories of change operating at the same time that began together over a number of years to create a critical mass to significantly reduce smoking. The same was true in the end of apartheid. There are people working within South Africa to end apartheid, people working from the outside. There were educational efforts, there were regulatory efforts, there were efforts in religion, in the sports arena, in finance, in public policy and international diplomacy. And so a theory of transformation draws upon a number of different theories of change and looks at how they're integrating together, which is integration theory. What have we learned about how different forms of change, both from the micro to the macro and the meso in the middle, but different across sectors, across ways of bringing about change. Iceberg theory becomes important in this regard, knowing that we're dealing not just with what we can see, with what's visible, but also with informal norms, the things that are beneath the surface, with changing the structures that are not so visible. A great deal of what happens in the multinational corporate world is happening behind the formal scenes, the Davos kinds of connections where people form relationships. That's a part of the work. Beverly Parsons has done a beautiful job of illustrating how iceberg theory gives us insights into different levels of visibility of change. Fidelity theory has to do with whether or not what is called transformational is actually transformational, and gets into the issues of hype and green glossing and greenwashing that we're going to talk a bit more about. And then all of this involves at the top, learning theory, how we make sense of things, how we change. At the bottom, strategic alignment theory, how various strategic approaches to change. In the works on strategy, there are several different strategic pathways that corporations use to bring about change. Those get aligned in a theory of transformation. And on the left hand, there's system thinking. On the right hand, a complexity theory. So that a comprehensive, multidimensional, integrated theory of transformation would involve all of these, based at the bottom on developmental evaluation theory, working with various players, with various people involved in different kinds of these transformational trajectories to help them connect what they're doing. And that's a role for Blue Marble evaluation. Other kinds of theories of change that you can integrate into a theory of transformation: scaling theory, nudge theory out of behavioral finance, positive deviance, impact investing theories, technological innovation theories, information theory, the theory of the corporation, moving from profits only to the triple bottom line. And so basically what I'm suggesting is that a theory of transformation is not made up of a discrete, identifiable, limited numbers of theories of change, but that at any number of initiatives, each of which may be operating on its own particular theory of change, can be integrated to create more major transformation. And that's a part of the work that Blue Marble evaluators can do together. As we, working often separately on these different projects and different initiatives, can help communicate about the contributions of each toward a larger kind of systems change. The Hague hypothesis, which I talk about in the book, named for my doctoral advisor, Jerry Haig, who's at the University of Maryland, who has looked at social change in complex organizations, how organizations work together to bring about major change, has written about the post-industrial world, organizational change as a development strategy. The Haig hypothesis, in a new book he has coming out early next year, says that successful transformation requires diversity integrated into a strongly connected and coordinated systemic network, meaning that transformation is accelerated if these different theories of change and different actors and different networks begin to collaborate together, understanding that they're each contributing, creating conditions for larger change, but nobody's in charge here. Nobody's in control. That's part of the complexity theory. So it's a matter of creating connections, going with momentum, finding out what's working well, making adaptive shifts as things go on. A transformation network theory says if a partnership creates diverse alliances of people, places, organizations, and resources, facilitates their convergence around a shared vision and values, and implements strong, effective actions in strategic places and niches that are coordinated and integrated across organizational boundaries, then it will contribute to broad, sustained transformation. This is connected to global action networks, a cumulative body of research and knowledge pointing to interlocking networks as the pathway to transformation in complex dynamic systems. And we have our own evaluation systems that can connect to these different processes. The Global Alliance for the Future of Food, under the leadership of Executive Director Ruth Richardson, has adopted this form of theory of change. They have adopted a network-based theory of change that says, we believe that transformational change requires that we craft new and better solutions at all scales through a systems-level approach and deep collaboration between philanthropy, researchers, grassroots movements, the private sector, farmers, and food systems workers, indigenous peoples, government, and policymakers. Transformation means realizing healthy, equitable, renewable, resilient, and culturally diverse food systems shared by people, communities, and their institutions. In October of 2021, the United Nations is hosting a World Food Summit, and Blue Marble Evaluation Network is going to help support the build up and momentum toward that World Food Summit by helping interpret and support and facilitate dialogues among various parts of the food systems in movement towards that Food Summit. And you'll be hearing more from me about that in the new year, as I'm going to be needing to recruit people to assist with the dialogues and the interpretation of those dialogues as they emerge. The Theory of Transformation summary of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food says that genuine food system transformation takes place when diverse actions, networks, and individuals intersect across sector and issue silos, the global and the local, the macro and the micro. These intersections facilitate convergence around shared visions and values, ultimately build critical mass and momentum behind tipping points that lead to healthy, equitable, renewable, resilient, and culturally diverse food systems that dynamically endure over time. Let me pause there and see if there are questions or comments that, and see what's turned up here in chat. If you want to come off of mute and make a comment or ask a question. Andrew Lisa says dynamic may mean adaptive. She cites page 154 of the text that no one controls or manages transformation, but synergistic interactions can propel. This takes humility and a safety to admit contribution, not attribution of important change, to own one's control. There are implications for governance evaluation of governance and governance of evaluation to work at systems level for transformation in response to emergency evidence and uncertainty. And one of the areas for a lot of work is indeed the governance systems that we need to create. And we've got folks on this system working on that. Sana asked, can we consider transformational change theory as a dynamic change, and we evaluate in the dynamic matter? And Andrelisa has in part responded to that. And I would say that everything about what's going on in our world, including transformation theories, has to be viewed as dynamic and adaptive. And that's why I'm not suggesting there's a fixed set of theories of change that can be integrated into a theory of transformation. In fact, it's an inclusive approach that invites anybody who's working in this area with shared values and visions to become part of those changes. Let's see what else we've got here. Some more excellent comments from Angelisa. Anyone want to come off mute and comment?
I have a question, please, Mr. Michael.
Yes, go ahead.
My comments before Andrelisa, it was, I think above you can see it. I'm Sana Al-Hinnawi from Jordan, Middle East. My question was as a dynamic. If we are talking about transformation evaluation theory, so we are talking somehow as a dynamic. My point, I don't have the book, and I admire a lot of these concepts. Thank you very much, Michael. It's very, very beautiful. But my question is, dynamic means that you take everything and still going, and you are evaluating what is going on. There's not something which is on a spot, or time will stop and then you will evaluate it. Is that right? Is that thing that you are talking about? Transformation means that there are a continuous situation of something about changing and trying just to evaluate things while it is changing continuously. Is that will be transformation? Somehow, do you know, that's something which is roughly, is that right or not? Thank you very much. I'm from Jordan, and thank you for this, for your patience.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's a very important point, and it's where complexity theory has a great deal to teach us, because we aren't able to stop things. It's not a static model. Things are changing even as we intervene, and our interventions and our measurements and our participation, that's part of the final principle in the Blue Marble book, that evaluation is inherently an intervention, becomes part of the dynamic process. We're not outside it. We're within the very changes that we're looking at. We become part of those dynamics. And so as things unfold and as they emerge, we're only able to see in the rearview mirror what's happened, try to make sense of it, even as we're caught in the whirlpool of change going forward. And that is, I don't want to pretend to have answers to how we do all of that. That is contrary to 50 years of evaluation, which is largely based upon static notions of pre-test and post-tests, of getting a picture at one time and a picture at a second time, and taking attribution for what happened in between. Randomized controlled trials are based upon control, are based upon generalizable best practices kinds of thinking, none of which is going to be working in this highly dynamic environment. And so we're having to constantly be adjusting. We're in the whirlpool, in the rapids, as these changes occur. And that's part of the reason for both increasingly short turnaround, rapid appraisal kinds of approaches, but also the importance of looking at that in the context of a larger, longer term vision that includes sustainability and equity. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, it's great to get to see you again. I think one of the things when things are changing so quickly is trying to have proactive and anticipatory, it's not even evaluation as much as it is trying to anticipate. And just because oftentimes by the time you can determine if it worked or not, in a sense, it's too late. So any thoughts on how to really build in that you're not even evaluating what did happen, but more what is likely to happen and how you can respond before it happens to improve the outcomes?
It's a great point, and I think part of what we're having to learn is, and it's part of where theories of change as a part of a larger theory transformation become helpful, is being able to differentiate those systems where we have enough data from the past to be able to do more concrete anticipation. So I was working with a group of ecologists who are doing ecosystem management, and we were talking about the things like you can know if you're trying to do reforestation that if the trees you plant are dead after a year, a certain proportion of them, you're not going to end up with a forest. You don't have to wait 20 years to find out whether or not you got a forest.
Mhm.
If you find out, as we are now, we know about huge disparities in our health system and our economic system, the racism and social injustice. And so we can look at early indicators, anticipate that we have to get access changed in order to get outcomes changed. We're not going to get different outcomes if we don't get different access, if we don't deal with some of the interrelated issues of poverty. So I think it makes it all the more important that we combine data and theory, anticipation being a form of theory. What do we think is going to happen? What would be the early indicators of that tells us whether or not that trajectory is likely to be realized? And what are the ways that we look for unanticipated consequences? We've got to be out there paying attention not only to what we're trying to change, but what's swirling around it that may have negative impacts.
Mhm.
The impacts of the pandemic and of people having this long period of being shut down together. We're just beginning to get a sense of some of the issues around that, on family violence, on human health, on communities. Those effects are going to be with us for a long time. And the early indications become really important to look at. The thing that makes it challenging, of course, is that one of the things we know about systems change in many cases is that things will get worse before they get better. But when you're moving from an old system to a new system and the new system's not in place yet, the things may look worse and may be worse in that transition period. So how to stay the course during the transition into a new, healthier system, we have to have theory for that as well, to understand why things are maybe getting worse in certain arenas before they get better.
Right. It seems that historically in evaluation, the theory of change has sort of been something that was established up front and sort of cast in, maybe not concrete, but it was a static sort of, here's our theory of change. Whereas now it can be part of this dynamic framework for learning what you're trying to deal with, especially in situations like now when you have so many innovators all around the world innovating in parallel, using a dynamic theory of change, or we tend to use a strategy map as a type of theory of change to understand who's working on different parts of it and how could they be combined in ways that maybe were never done, but we're just learning different people and organizations and communities that are innovating in different parts of it. And you don't necessarily have the time and bandwidth to evaluate which one worked, because but you may have a lot of more informal learning on what might help as you're trying to combine these things, but around a theory of change or a strategy map.
Yeah, and we're constantly seeing that things are taking directions we couldn't imagine. We're in the midst of figuring out social media. Goodness, all the negative stuff that's happening with social media, all the positive things that are happening with social media, and we're early in that game to find out that's going to affect things. I saw a report the other day, you probably saw, that was startling. The artificial intelligence, which is supposed to help us solve this, turns out to be one of the biggest consumers of energy, and that in the next 5 years, the greatest source of carbon in the environment may be created by the huge amount of heat and energy used by artificial intelligence computers. They're estimating a 300,000 increase in the heat generated simply from all of these supercomputers doing artificial intelligence as everybody's ramping up for it. So the very thing that's supposed to help solve the problem is generating a whole new problem by its own. It's becoming the major energy user in our world, artificial intelligence. And so these kinds of interrelationships that emerge is a part of what we're having to learn to track. So let me turn to, for a few minutes, some of you are familiar with this and not everybody is. Back to sharing. This is not in the book. It's the latest, my latest thinking on transformation. And I want to at least introduce it to folks. To it here. So the next print edition of the American Journal of Evaluation will have this article on evaluation criteria for evaluating transformation. It's online now, and some of you have seen it. And it basically is arguing that the traditional criteria for evaluating projects, especially the OECD DAC criteria, are inadequate for transformation. Criteria constitute the nuclear core of evaluation's energy function, rendering judgment. Without criteria, there can be no judgment. Without judgment, there can be no evaluation. Criteria express, manifest, encompass, make explicit, and operationalize what we value, what is valued. Criteria mediate the conversion of values into judgments. They prioritize what's important. They direct what questions to ask, data to collect, results to highlight. They focus reporting and conclusions. To what extent and what ways have criteria been met? So the traditional OECD DAC criteria formulated in 1991 call for evaluation to judge projects and programs on their relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. They went through a review process in the last 2 years and added coherence. These criteria developed 30 years ago, when they were reviewed in the last 2 years through a survey, through multi-stakeholder consultations. They asked people to submit reports, a number of agencies did, and basically the international evaluation community decided the criteria ought to be retained. A high majority of respondents preferred to retain the criteria and definition in full of each of these criteria. 94% wanted to maintain relevance, 98% effectiveness, which is whether outcomes are attained, 93% wanted to retain efficiency and sustainability, 89% wanted to retain impact. And the qualitative comments basically said, we know these criteria, they've worked, why change something that's not broken? So the revision focused primarily upon adding the criterion of coherence. How well does a particular intervention fit? But the important thing that I want to stress is that these are project outcome criteria. They're about discrete, as you were saying, Bill, they're discrete programs designed with a logic model or theory of change to create and generate and achieve specific SMART goals. I don't think they work well for transformation. So in this article, I've proposed a set of alternative criteria some of which we've already talked about today: transformation fidelity, complex systems framing, full cost accounting, diversity, equity, and inclusion, adaptive sustainability, and interconnectedness. And in the article, I discuss each of these criteria in some depth. I'll go through a couple of these. The transformation fidelity criteria is looking at the extent to which the realities of transformational change initiatives match transformational aspirations and rhetoric. This is one of the Valu Marble evaluation principles, ensuring that what is called transformation constitutes transformation, and evaluating whether and how what is called transformational engagement constitutes a trajectory toward transformation. Andrew Natsios, the administrator of U.S. Agency for International Development, once said, "Those development programs that are most precisely and easily measured are the least transformational, and those programs that are most transformational are the least measured." Peter Drucker famously said, the great management consultant and guru, "If you want something new, you have to stop doing something old." And I think that to fit transformation of systems into the old OECD DAC criteria does damage to both transformational initiatives and to the potential of evaluation. He also said the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And so doing transformational fidelity means really doing what evaluation's always done, is seeing if what's being said is real. It's a reality check on what's being said. So there's all this work towards thinking green, and there's a term that's emerged called greenwashing, a play on the term whitewashing, which means using misleading information to gloss over bad behavior. Greenwashing involves disinformation disseminated by an organization so as to present an environmentally responsive public image. Asking the question, is it really green? Green products have increased over 73%, but more than 95% of products are guilty of greenwashing, according to the True Goods rating system. Green sheen is another term that's used for this. Like when we used to stay in hotels, the notion that the hotel was asking us to reuse towels primarily for saving the planet, when as much as anything, it saved them the expense of the laundry. So transformation glossing is something for us to be watching for. And I'm already seeing a lot of that in evaluation. And we talked about moving from a theory of change to a theory of transformation, from evaluability assessments to transformational assessments, and looking then at transformational trajectories. Is there a theory of transformation? What are the transformational mechanisms? What's the transformational engagement? What's the transformational trajectory? What are the transformational principles framework? That we ask transformational questions about things called transformation and not put them in the old project box. A second, you all know complexity. I'm going to skip through those and go to the resilience criterion. Resilient ecological sustainability. The big difference here is that the DAC criteria for sustainability is actually continuity. It's the funder view of if they've funded something, they ask if it's going to be sustainable, meaning will the project and the benefits continue after funding is over? It's not about ecological, resilient, adaptive sustainability. And so that form of sustainability, evaluation for transformational change, as talked about at the International Development Evaluation Association and the Prague Declaration that came out last year, they're called for sustainability to be a universal criteria in all evaluations, a contribution to the sustainability of the environment in a dynamic, resilient, adaptive sense that we were talking about, not simply going forward and doing the same kind of things. So when we look at in summary, the DAC criteria, the efficiency criteria, the relevance criteria turns into transformational fidelity, effectiveness, linear logic models turn into complex adaptive systems focus, the efficiency criteria of input and output, the project itself looking at the interconnection, the input output measurement becomes looking at true cost accounting, resilient adaptive sustainability, eco-efficiency, full cost accounting, the impacts on the environment, on human health, diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, and the way in which the things that are going on begin to be interconnected towards critical mass, and the overarching changes through a connected theory of change. So I'm going to want to invite your criteria as we look towards a future where the importance of this is to think towards that 7th generation, towards the future. Let me stop here, get any additional questions or comments, and then Charmaine in the last 5 minutes is going to invite your thoughts about where we may be headed next year with Blue Marble evaluation. Stephen asked, where is consideration of time and context of time? I've run that throughout as a Blue Marble evaluation principle rather than making it a separate criterion, so that the interconnectedness criteria addresses both short-term and long-term, how time is connected over time, addresses the relationships across sectors, across actors, across networks, and to see that time is one of the threads of interconnection, a red thread that runs through all of the other criteria. Stephen's also asking, what are the criteria in greenwashing for determining what is really green? Well, it asks the question. I mean, that's what transformational fidelity does, is to say, how would we know if something is really green? What are the criteria for judging that? This is coming up as a version of the fair trade movement in various commodities. You know, coffee, is it really fair trade? Cocoa, is it really fair trade? And so when we're asking the question about transformation or greenwashing, there are groups as in impact investing. One of the things that's just emerged that is a way of looking at the extent to which corporations are genuinely embracing the triple bottom line. Are they genuinely engaged in sustainable practices? Are they genuinely engaged in diversity practices? And independently having corporations rated on those criteria is a way to get past the green glossing. Beverly asked, to what extent do we need to describe what we are transforming from and what we are transforming to? Clearly, very important. Evaluation is always an exercise from something to something, and tracking those differences. Baselining the existing systems, looking backwards at how they came from, where they came from. And that's part of how we know whether or not transformation has occurred. Sana is asking, what about the confusion of the adaptive methodologies and criteria based on the before and after? Why should not we redefine based on the old? Well, I think that is part of what we're asking to do. And indeed, what this amounts to is not a set of answers or a set of discrete methods. It is more in the line of a set of questions. The transformation invites us into an inquiry that's different, to think differently, to think beyond projects and programs, to think about our criteria differently. We're at the early stages of this. And I end the article in AJE on transformation criteria by suggesting that I mean for them to be illuminative and generative, not definitive. They're not the final set of criteria, They are to raise the question, how are transformation criteria different than project outcome criteria? And that we as a community take on this question of how to engage transformation, because that way of thinking and engaging is what the future very much hinges on. Charmaine, let me turn it over to you to engage folks in looking at our future together.
Thanks. Yeah, so we've done monthly webinars for Blue Marble evaluation, as well as these monthly book club conversations that have varied in size, and different people have engaged over the course of the year. And we hope they've been useful, but we wanted to look forward at what you would like to see, what opportunities you would like to see to continue your learning, or opportunities you'd like to offer. And we're a network that is trying to be as engaging, creating opportunities, but also inviting of others to create them. So I did put a link in the chat to a Jamboard. You can write comments there, or you can use the chat, or you can come off mute and offer ideas that you have or things you'd like to see in the new year. See if I can share this as well.
I think it would be wonderful if we could have some facilitation of Blue Marble evaluation baselining for some of our Canadian Evaluation Society, EES, AEA work, so that would engage people who are wondering, what is this all about, and how do we apply it? It would have that learning and that awareness benefit in general, but it would also allow some of the societies that already have environmental evaluation TIGs or environmental type infrastructure in their societies for evaluation to be applying some of these principles if they wanted to opt into that. I think that would be a fun way of building some community among networks.
Thanks, Andrea, Lisa. It does seem like there's a desire. We've sort of spent a lot of the year looking at the principles and some of the theory behind things, but doing some skill building exercises and more engagement is something that we would like to do and we'll look at. And there was another one on here that just got deleted, so I'm not sure what happened there.
Charmaine, I think I've mentioned this to you before about getting youth involved. So the only thing that I want to say is that I'm not trying to move to a more silo sort of system. So by, creating a youth focus. So if that still fits in within the systems and transformation thinking, I think that would be really great to have sort of like either a youth chapter or link up with Evaluate, as you mentioned.
Yeah, we have a number of these sort of Blue Marble evaluation hubs forming around the world. But thinking about how we're connecting with Eval Youth and Eval Indigenous and what that looks like, whether there are sort of, some intentional opportunities to bring the communities together, or, a specific kind of learning community that has Eval Youth and Blue Marble evaluation members who are, in that overlapping Venn diagram that we can bring together with some learning opportunities. So let's talk about that. I would love to. Well, this Jamboard will be up, so if you have other ideas, please add them there, or you know how to reach us, hopefully. And we're curating kind of the more official Blue Marble evaluation offerings in the next few weeks, but we'll, you know, in the spirit of being dynamic and responsive, continue to be thinking about this and want your engagement and ideas as we go along. Michael, I'll turn it back over to you.
There is a group being convened by Zinda Ophir looking at forming an eval transform group as part of the Eval Partners framework. So there'll be some work going on there that we may contribute to and help think about. I appreciate you folks being a part of this. You've all influenced my own thinking. It continues to evolve, and there's going to be a lot of action coming forward in the new year. We can expect to go on. Any of you who are interested in writing blogs about the things you're seeing or doing and connecting in that way, contributing, offering webinars, that's what the platform is for. So we welcome that and wish you all a happy and prosperous 2021, which is sure to be dynamic. Meanwhile, we can look at the glossing that goes on about all the hype around 2020. I'm amazed at all the newspaper headlines and media headlines that 2020 was unlike any other year. Isn't that true of every year? Isn't that what makes a year a year? Every year is unlike any other year. I don't remember any replications of years in my lifetime. And every presidential election I've been involved in since my first in 1960 has been the most important presidential election up to that time. So in our world of hype, things are unprecedented and unique and unlike any other. But part of what we do is find patterns and themes. And the things we've been talking about are carrying forward into the new year. We'll all be working on them together. So we look forward to joining with the community and look forward to your presidency, Tom. Looking forward to President Tom Grayson takes over on January 1st with AEA. And have you picked a theme yet for the meeting?
Oui, bien sûr. AEA at 35, meeting the moment.
All right.
And the moment is what you've been describing. That's quite a challenge. Right now, my mind is just clouded with how do we change policy to address systems change, the way we've been discussing it. And when I think about policy, I think about not only mandates, I think about things like training and symbolic panels and whatever it's to get people thinking and motivated. The question that I wrote is we need to evaluation so it can address the transformations that we're experiencing today. So I don't know, I might have to knock on your door, ring your doorbell a few times and your colleagues to help me answer some things.
Well, we look forward to your leadership during this coming year. So happy holidays, everybody. Bye-bye.